Notre prochaine conférencière, Rees, Senior Director de UX à Google Cloud, va nous parler de comment design AI that get us. Merci d'avoir plein d'applaudissements pour Kim.
Hi, everybody. I'm Kim. As David mentioned, I work at Google Cloud. I lead a team that is focused on making sure that everybody who comes to Google Cloud has a good experience and it's easy to use for them. Is this thing working? All right. I'm going to talk about AI, of course, right? Shocker. I mean, what a time to be alive. This is an incredible evolution of technology. Terrifying, of course. The topic of this conference, I think, is spot on. What keeps you up at night? There's so many things, right? But also, what an incredible time to be alive. What an incredible time to be in this industry and focused on making experiences that are useful for people, right? Over the past few years, we've seen AI become more and more magical and give these really astonishing experiences. But it's not only the capabilities that are magical and make that happen, it's also that this technology is starting to get us, right? It's starting to understand a little bit about who we are. And I had an experience a couple of years ago that really kind of opened my eyes to that phenomenon. I got in my car one night at 2 a.m., around 2 a.m., and it popped up, it auto-loaded the directions to the emergency room. And you might be wondering, what the heck, right? Let me give you a little context. Let me back it up a few weeks. I had a 12-year-old son at the time, and he was having these really extreme bouts of asthma. This was an emergent medical condition for him. He had never had that before, very scary, and we would have to rush him to the ER, and it was always in the middle of the night. So this was around the third or fourth time this happened. I hop in the car, and it popped up the ER. And it was that moment where I realized, it was the context. It was like understanding something about me, right? It was not so much that, that this was like some fancy technology. I don't even think it was AI, right? Kind of a simple technology almost. But what it was doing was looking for signals of what was meaningful for me. So it figured out, oh, Kim's getting in the car at the middle of the night. She's probably going to the ER. And it was spot on. It was spot on. And it felt really powerful in that moment. I still was scared as heck driving to the ER with my son who was having an asthma attack. But it just made that moment of time easier for me to get going where I needed to go. And that context is really a powerful element of this technology. I also want to talk about the power of language that I feel like it's these two elements that are really coming together at this perfect time. And this seems really kind of like a basic shift. It's a tremendous shift, but it seems like kind of a basic concept of we're shifting from into the natural language world. But what's really happening is that the technology is completely flipping over. So until today, until this time that we're in, we've had to speak in computer language, right? We have had to speak to the box. We have had to, and that's what the entire UX field has been about. How do we make it easier for people to speak to the computer? And so we've crafted these experiences that help people do that better. And now it's completely flipped. It's done a 180. And now the computer is coming to us in our language of choice, right? In whatever your language of choice is, it can now come to you. And that is a profound shift, absolutely profound. And also, language is infinitely scalable in breadth and nuance. And so it can get you so much further, so much faster than drop downs and boxes, buttons, and those types of things that we've had to speak through before. And so, we're really looking at this shift where design used to shape what users had to do, and now we're shaping what the computer has to do to come to us and give us that experience. And so it's about, making that shift into how do we translate what we need to do. Before we had to sort of craft a conduit for intent, and now we can just express intent and have that experience. And ironically, AI, it understands the vastness of humanity, right? It's been trained on data that is gobbled up from all over the world, all across the web. It understands everything, seems to understand everything, right? You can type in anything and it spits out a response. How many people remember the first time you saw the ChatGPT screen? Yeah, I still remember that day where I clicked one of those prompts and I was skeptical and it came out with something magical. And then I tried another and another, and it just kept coming back with these magical responses. But the irony of it is it understands all of humanity, but it doesn't yet understand me. It doesn't yet understand my context, right? So when I clicked on the one about create a birthday for a 10-year-old, it came up with all these great examples, and I was like, wow, this is so cool. And then I had to keep telling him, well, my 10-year-old likes Roblox, and my 10-year-old likes art and strawberry cake, and no, we don't like the zoo, and all of these things. And I basically had to feed it more and more context about me so that it could respond appropriately to what I needed in the moment, right? So a lot needs to happen to go from that generic response, which can still feel magical, but generic. So a lot needs to happen in between that generic response and something that's meaningful for me. So how do we fix that? It's really about that context that I was speaking about. Now, there are a variety of types of context, and really what I'm talking about is data. What's the data that's going into the model, into the experience? But I'm really going to lump it into two categories because I think it's really as simple as that. We've got system context and we've got user context. And when it adds those two things together, it can spit out something that is meaningful, right? Without user context, it can still spit out an answer. But it really takes that user context for it to be a meaningful experience. So for system context, I mean things like that are obvious. So say if I'm using a photo app, all of the photos in the system are the system data. Now, the things that are personal to me are user data, but just like all the number of photos, the generic photos I have, maybe business data that's in there, like if it's an e-commerce site, it's the product catalog, things like location for a map, environmental data, things that are sort of generic to the product, all the data that goes into making an experience in that application. And with user data, it's more about, okay, from within that environment, what's personal to me? So going back to the photos, it will be my relationship graph within those photos, like who are the people, who shows up next to each other. It could be things like my preferences, my favorite photos. It's gonna be things like my browsing history or things that I've searched on. It could be behavioral data like my interaction patterns, my telemetry, those types of things that really differentiate between what I'm doing in the system, what David's doing in the system, what all of you are doing. It's the differentiation between that generic system data and our individual experiences. So if we go back to my ER example, what my car GPS was doing was it had a bunch of its own system data, it has its own GPS. It knows where it is. It knows all of the businesses around it. It knows distances. It knows the types of businesses, those types of things. It knows time of day. When I get in the car, it knows my user data. It knows what my navigation patterns are. It knows what I do at different times of the day. It knows my anomalies, things that are unique to my driving pattern. And from all of that, when it adds those things up, it's able to spit out something meaningful, like Kim needs to go to the ER right now. So there's a whole new area of engineering emerging called context engineering that's focusing on all of that, like all of the data that goes into making AI systems work. But what I want to call out is really the user context here, because that's where UX can really start to have an outsized impact on how AI operates and the meaning that it provides us and really starts to understand us and what's meaningful to us as people. And just to give a little bit, who remembers prompt engineering, when prompt engineering was all the rage and you had to learn how to be a prompt engineer? Yeah, I hear the laughter, yes. So there was a time that turned out to be very brittle and clunky and just not right. It wasn't the right solution. But this is from Anthropic. You can look this up on their site. It really talks about that shift from prompt engineering to this new world of context engineering. So this is just an overly simplified way of looking at it, but it's really what's the data that goes in, what are the unstructured things, files and data sources and all those things. How do we put those together and curate those into a meaningful experience? And so I just wanted to share this as the technological side is advancing, sometimes on a daily basis on this topic. So let's sort of take a simple example, another map example. But let's say I just have system data, and I ask and we're making let's say a Maps app, and the user asks, how late is the hardware store open, right? So if I just have system data, I might look for things like what's the closest to the person, what are the ratings of the store, what are the hours. It has sort of the generic, and it might pick, okay, it looks like Home Depot is probably the right answer. So what do you think? Is that the right answer? Maybe. Hard to tell. We don't know yet, right? It's an answer. It's a plausible answer. It could be a right answer. But let's say I add in user context to this. Person asks the same question, and now I have their driving history, and I can say, oh, actually, it looks like the user tends to go to Joe's Hardware. They must like that store. They go there a lot, and so we're going to prefer Joe's Hardware over Home Depot and give this example, right? So Home Depot is still a correct answer. It might be slightly less relevant to me if I really love Joe's Hardware, right? But in this case, based on the way that I interacted with the system, it could decide, I'm going to take a guess. I'm going to go out on the limb here and guess that Joe's hardware is what Kim really wants in this scenario. So how do we arrive at this? It's similar to the ER story, right? But really want to focus on the system data is what makes those answers possible, and a user context is what makes that meaningful. So here, the system context, again, is all that GPS data. It's looking at all those stores and locations and open hours and all those things. My user context is, where have I been recently? What do I tend to do? Have I ever been to Home Depot before? And then I can spit out a meaningful answer. Now keep in mind, these don't always have to be binary, right? It could also show me Home Depot as maybe second in the list. So we have options as designers of how we want to express these choices that we make, these inferences that we make on behalf of the user, and how we express those in the system. But I want to say that I think we have this really beautiful time where we don't need to have everything sorted out, right? I think what we're finding is people would rather have a slightly imperfect response as long as it's meaningful to them. Maybe not in a self-driving car, right? There you want some accuracy. You don't want to take a guess on that. But there are lots of scenarios where it's a lower stakes environment, and we can make some assumptions. We can give a more meaningful response. And I think that's really what we saw with ChatGPT when they launched, with OpenAI when they launched ChatGPT. It was, hey, we're not perfect, but we think it's good enough to release and people can get value out of it, right? So it's a balance between accuracy and meaning and understanding and really what you find is appropriate for your user. But most systems today really optimize for being correct, and that's why you feel a lot of these systems are still spitting out some generic responses. Still really interesting, still great technology, but isn't hitting as that part of us where it just feels right, So I do want to note, though, that the area where I feel like as a discipline, we have an interesting role to play now where we need to be advocates for users and their data, on both sides, and the utility of it in the experience and making meaning, and also for the responsible use of it. I'm not going to do a talk on ethics, but that's a whole other field. But it's really that blend of how do we want to bring user context and user data into their experience in a responsible way in service of what they need. And so I see design as really shifting upstream of the sort of outward expression of an experience. So we're really looking at what's the data that's going in, how do we advocate for really rich data. That could be things like sensor data on cars or on your phone. It could be telemetry data. It could be behavioral data. It could be all sorts of things. But it's really up to us as designers to be the steward of that data and that experience. And another side of that is that the reason I say advocate is because it's a negotiation. This is just one of many technical models for how context is dealt with. I don't even understand a lot of what this chart says, to be perfectly honest. And it's changing. Every company is different. This is not a Google example. Just one that I found, but there are a variety of different ways of handling context. It's because there are trade-offs that you have to make. It can be very costly to use context. It can be, there can be performance issues with context, latency. You get into these scenarios where you have to decide whether you want to send a lot of context and have a good experience or not a lot and have a more brittle experience. And so it's up to the designer to really be able to handle those negotiations and understand how to make those trade-offs too. So I want to dig into some examples of actual real-world examples of when I've experienced these magical, meaningful moments in my life. So this is Google Photos. I use this a lot. I love it, not just because I'm at Google. I just love it. So the other day, I was like, well, let me see how well Photos knows me. So I asked it, who's my favorite person and why? And it picked my son. So good job, Google. It picked my son. And it gave me some rationale for why, because I took the most pictures of him. And so that's a big signal. But also, he's appeared in a lot of photos with other family and friends. He's in a lot of my favorited photos, a myriad of things that went into that. And I'm sure more that they didn't even list. And so this is like amazing. And this is, I interact with this product a lot, and this is kind of a goofy example because who would ever say who's my favorite person? I already know who my favorite person is. I was just testing it. But there are a lot of times where, for instance, my husband's birthday, I always forget his birthday. And one time last year, I was like, the day before, I was like, I need to have something special for his birthday. And so I just asked Google Photos, put together a bunch of great photos that shows like all the great times that we've had together. And it did a fantastic job of finding those moments that were really joyful, things that I had forgotten about. And so I was able to put them in a little slideshow thing and go. And so that to me is what I mean by meaningful. Like I could have asked it for photos of Christian, my husband, and it could have come up with like the last 20 photos or whatever. That's not as good, right? It looked back at like emotion and joy and like the things that make life meaningful. And that's where, what I'm describing with, how do we start to become advocates for that level of meaning for people? Now, I will say that even though it got it right, I do have another son. So, Google, you're not supposed to say I have a favorite. So, I did ask it, since it picked one son, I had to ask it who's my second favorite person, and it picked my other son. So thankfully, it at least got both sons in the top two. Otherwise, I would have really been in trouble. But I found it kind of amusing that, it was right, but it wasn't exactly right, because there really are two favorites. You can't have a 1 and 2. Another kind of context is temporal. So things that happen over time and what makes meaning over time. And this is different. It's for different scenarios and different reasons. This is Gmail. This has been out for a few years now, so this is not anything new, but it's the little nudge, which I rely on so much because my inbox is like a river of information. And it figures out who's meaningful to you. It doesn't put this on every single email, right? It figures out over time, who's important to me, who's worth, nudging Kim to respond to. People like David. So, it's those moments where it can make all the difference in the world. When, we live in a time when we're overwhelmed and stressed out, and these things can just be a simple, little, meaningful moment for folks. Who here uses Figma? Yes, love me some Figma. That's what we use at Google. I love Figma. This is Figma Make. How many use Figma Make? Some? Okay, got to try it out. This is just a toy, silly example. I had it make a clock. It's an ugly clock, clearly. I didn't design it. But I just said make a clock, and that's what it came up with. I deliberately made the hours styled differently so that I could do this example where I clicked on the element and said, make this one like the others, right? Like how vague could I be, right? And it still figured it out and made it like the others, exactly like I wanted it to, right? So these are more task-based contexts, situational contexts, so it's more like in the moment, what is available. How do we make that available to the AI so when you're asking it a question, it knows what you're referring to. It can figure out this means this element and that means these other things, right? But it doesn't get that for free. The designers of Figma had to figure out what is meaningful to somebody in the moment when they're looking at something they just designed or Vibe designed, right? And how do we help them sort of bridge that gap from intent to reality? This one is a product that I worked on at Google called Conversational Analytics. And now this is one where you have to be right because it's somebody's business data that they're working with. This is all an analytical product. So less of an opportunity to get a little bit fluffy with it. But this is another example of where somebody's going into their data. They want to have a better experience, and so they're pulling in their own data, they're referring to different things within their system, and the AI is responding to it in a meaningful way because it understands the context of their business data. And so this was like, people love this tool. This is the first time that you can actually do proper data analytics within natural language. And context could be what I call wall-to-wall, which is basically like the context is the thing that makes it possible. Who here has used Cursor? All right, cool. Cursor tab is hard to describe if you're not a programmer. But Cursor tab is like, they call it autocomplete. It's a tab for autocomplete, but it does more than just autocomplete. It autocompletes not just a line of code, it autocompletes the next thing you want to do. So that could be a chunk of code, it could be a line of code, it could be a variable name. It's like somebody's sitting next to you, and in programming, you can kind of tell based on, oh, somebody's gonna make a database call. Oh, they're probably gonna write a SQL statement, and based on the function name, it's probably going to do a query on all of their products. So what Cursor tab does is it sort of fills in what it thinks you're gonna do, and you tab to accept it. It is, in my mind, it embodies this concept of using user data for a meaningful experience. They nailed it. So if you want to try it, or just go to the website and learn more about it, it's a phenomenal, phenomenal experience. It uses these such nuanced context for like how they're figuring this out. So they factor in it's sort of like this, huge formula of like trying to figure out what all these different things mean and how to put it together to make that beautiful experience. But it's like, the text their code that they're working on, the nearby code, the variable names, the function names, files in the system, when did they last access certain things? And it's sort of guessing and figuring out, they're probably most likely to do X or Y or Z. Absolutely wonderful experience. And just the proof point behind how these experiences pan out in the real world to business success. I'm not gonna say this is all attributable to Tab, but Cursor they're the fastest growing SaaS company and hit $1 billion annual revenue in under 2 years. I mean, absolutely unheard of. And I just heard, I don't know if it's true or not, but I just heard that they just doubled it again within the last 3 months. So this is the powerful experience that we can all start to aim for when we think that closely about how to connect AI to the context that somebody's working in. And the user quotes, if you look up user quotes about Cursor, I mean, people are like, it read my mind, I can't believe it. They're like, I've never heard users this voracious about a product ever in my life. That's absolutely wonderful and a great product to use. So another one that I want to highlight is, so recently, OpenAI started putting ads in their free tier. And Anthropic said, here's an opportunity to get those disgruntled ChatGPT users over to Claude. And so they wanted to lure folks over, but they realized the thing that makes products hard to leave, AI products hard to leave, is your context. You've invested time. This AI now understands you. It's made inferences. It's created memories. It has stored all of those things. And so it's very hard to walk away from a product that knows you. I'm a ChatGPT user. I've been before I started even working at Google. And I still, even though Anthropic has done this, I still have a hard time leaving that product because it has built up so much around me and who I am and all the things that I tell it. I'm afraid to leave it. And so we need to think about that. So basically what Anthropic did was they created a whole site where they made it easy for people to get their context out of ChatGPT and move it over to Claude. And it's a whole marketing thing. And it's wonderful. They were super smart about it. But I think it really points to understanding is the retention now. Understanding the user is the retention. It's so hard to walk away from something that gets you, right? People, too. When somebody gets you, it's somebody you want in your life. It's somebody who not only understands you, but creates meaning with you. So I did want to give a couple of things I think that we can all start to think about and ponder and focus on. What signals, as we think about our work day-to-day, what signals indicate somebody's situation? What are they going through? What are they, what is the data we have available? Sometimes it's just as easy, it's just a seemingly simple task of figuring out what signals are they giving us, but then what are the meaningful signals? What are the things that are going to make most sense? And again, that goes back to the context engineering. Like, we need to be able to make trade-offs. So we need to know what's a good signal versus a maybe signal. What should systems infer versus ask? And this one I give as homework. As you go about your days and you're interacting with things, you're in your car, your GPS, you're on your phone, you're doing different things, look for that, like, when is an AI inferring something about me, right? I think about that ER example all the time. I'm like, how did it figure that out, right? It was so perfect. It's a perfect example of when it inferred something on fuzzy signals and just gave me what I needed. How do users feel when the system anticipates something? Could easily go into creepy, right? Could easily go into like, why are you watching me? Why are you surveilling me, right? And so we need to think about that. And also, that's where user research comes in, and plays a very significant role in helping understand how are people feeling about the technology and how it's acting in their lives. And then I add, and also I just want to put a plug in to Anthropic. And how many of you have seen that huge study they just did, that they just released? 81,000 users. What do 81,000 users want in AI or something like that? You have to look this up. That's mandatory reading. It is absolutely stunning. Not only the output, the research itself, but their approach was, I was kind of skeptical about it at first, but when they described how they accomplished it, I think there's a lot to unpack there, but a really tremendous study with information that's just mind-boggling. And they have even a quote wall where they have all the quotes from different users around the world. It was a global study, so really worth taking the time to read that. And then finally, the confidence of the model. I think a lot of times if we work with technologists get hung up on the model, and like it has to be accurate, as most accurate as it can be, and has to have very high confidence before we give the user an answer. And like I said, I think a lot of that depends on, is this a high stakes moment or a low stakes moment? Is this a moment where we can say, the model doesn't have to have as high confidence. We can put something out in a way that is, still lets people know that, hey, this is a guess. But there's something about the mental model where when people are interacting with AI, and do we need to match their way of decision making and how, like, that level of rigor, or do we make the system more malleable to give them something meaningful yet imprecise, perhaps? And so I think that's an area to really dig into. It's not a black and white answer all the time. And then I just want to leave you all with, the most powerful systems aren't the ones that know the most. They're not the ones with the most gizmos and the most technically advanced. They're really the ones that know what matters, really know what matters. And that's where UX is and has always played a role. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tim.
Do we have time for questions?
Yeah, we have time.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Tim, for
Yeah,
your
thank you.
presentation. Est-ce qu'on a des questions dans la salle? Oui. Merci. Merci, Kessia.
Thank you for the great presentation. You sort of teased us by mentioning this study from Anthropic without going further. Could you?
I was so bummed because they just released it, I think, last week or the week before, and I was like, oh, my talk should be about this. Or they should invite Anthropic to give this talk because it's astounding. But if you Google it, it's basically they created an AI that did the interviews. So that's the part where I'm like, I'm not a researcher, so I'm not going to make the judgment there. But it was interesting that they were able to scale the interviews to 81,000 people, right? I mean, that is absolutely astonishing. Now, I didn't dig into the methodologies and all of that stuff, so I don't know. But they did do things like have adaptive questions based on the way that people were answering and so forth. But it really focused on both sides, what they call light and shade, and so the positive effects of AI and the negative effects. And so it felt pretty rigorous in that sense that they were gathering, where is AI helpful for people? Where is it falling down? And then they did a really amazing analysis, both like looking at global patterns, developing countries versus more mature developed countries. I mean, you have to read it. I haven't even digested the entire thing because it's really extensive. Again, they have this quote wall so you can dig into the actual verbatims from people. It's a really tremendous piece of work.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Merci beaucoup. Oui, on a une deuxième question ici.
Hi, I thought it was really interesting that you talked about there being use cases where AI's maybe tendency or like potential to give inaccurate information is not so critical versus cases where it is critical. And I'd love to get your opinions on how you would sort of differentiate that. So when you develop products, you know how to do that in like a way that's responsible and ethical.
Yeah. I think that's still a space that we're trying to figure out what's the right way of doing it. One way that we have looked at it is in that high stakes to low stakes. What's at risk if we get it wrong? Is there something that's irreversible that happens? That's a high stakes. Or is it something that somebody can easily reverse? Does it impact their business? And so it's really looking at the factors of the risk. What's the risk? What's the level of risk? And then if it's like meets a certain bar where we have decided we feel comfortable, okay, we're gonna let it be a little bit less precise, right? Follow up?
Yeah,
Okay, she has a follow-up question.
Yeah, can you hear me from here?
Now, we preferred you to talk in the mic for everyone to hear you.
Do you think deciding whether or not it's a high stakes or a low stakes situation, should it be more on the user end? And if so, how would you sort of design that?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Yes, there are times definitely when, I don't think we've figured that out yet. We have looked at, I think there's room for research there as well. Like we're trying to figure out what are the mental models when people are interacting with AI. Even, a year ago, people were still very skeptical. They didn't want to adopt. But once they start seeing the value, they're much more inclined to say, oh, I'm actually more comfortable. I'm okay letting it make that decision. And so we've been doing ongoing research about like what is that comfort level. And I think it's going to change over time. And then I think to your point too, there is room for maybe if we don't know, how can we design the experience so that it's, maybe not fully making a decision, but giving options, or like getting further down the road without it being, irreversible, or, taking too much action. So I think there's a lot of interplay between, both figuring out and letting the user choose, and also, can we make a sort of a progressive experience around it, depending on the situation. Yeah, thank you.
Est-ce qu'on a encore d'autres questions dans la salle? On a le temps pour 2 questions si des gens sont intéressés. No? You did an amazing job. Thank you very much, Kim,
Thank
for your
you. Thank
presentation.
you all.